My husband cheated with his friend's girlfriend. Then asked me to raise the baby. Welcome, this is Voice of Deborah and I share true life stories. The day my husband asked me to raise another woman's baby, I knew my marriage was over. But I had no idea the hospital would later reveal something even worse. I remember standing in our kitchen, the smell of burnt toast filling the air because I'd forgotten it in the toaster. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the spatula. Across from me, James sat at our breakfast table with his head in his hands, and the words he'd just spoken hung in the air like poison. Her name is Sienna. The baby's mine. She doesn't want it and... Clara, I need you to help me. Let me back up. 3 months earlier everything seemed perfect. James and I had been married for 6 years. We'd met in college, fallen in love over late-night study sessions and cheap pizza, and built what I thought was an unshakable life together. He worked in financial consulting, I was a pediatric nurse, and we just started trying for a baby of our own. His best friend since high school, Josh, had been dating this woman named Sienna for about 8 months. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are. Long dark hair, sharp cheekbones, always dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine. But there was something about her that made me uncomfortable. The way she touched James's arm a little too long when she laughed. How she'd show up at our house unannounced when she knew I was working night shifts. I told myself I was being paranoid. But then came the dinner party that changed everything. We'd hosted Josh and Sienna along with 2 other couples. I'd spent all day preparing coco vin, James's favorite. Halfway through the meal, I noticed Sienna and James kept exchanging glances. Not the friendly kind. The kind that made my stomach twist. When I went to the kitchen to get dessert, I heard them. They were in the hallway just outside, speaking in urgent whispers. I froze, the tiramisu trembling in my hands. You have to tell her, Sienna hissed. Not yet. The timing isn't right, James replied. When will it ever be right? I can't keep doing this. I dropped the dessert. The ceramic dish shattered across the tile floor, and they both jumped apart like teenagers caught making out. Everyone rushed in, concerned about the noise, and I played it off as clumsy exhaustion from my double shift. But I knew what I'd heard. That night, after everyone left and James had gone to bed, I did something I'd never done before. I went through his phone. My hands were sweating as I entered his passcode, our anniversary date, ironically, and opened his messages. What I found made my blood run cold. Months of texts between him and Sienna. Hundreds of them. They'd been sleeping together since February, less than 2 months after Josh introduced them. The messages were explicit, detailed, and devastating. But what made me physically ill was reading James complaining about me. Clara's been so focused on getting pregnant, she barely notices me anymore. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd never settled down so young. You make me feel alive again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash his phone against the wall and wake him up and demand answers. Instead, I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. I needed evidence. I needed proof. Because I had a feeling this was about to get much worse. But what happened next I never could have predicted. 2 weeks later, Sienna showed up at my hospital. I was in the middle of checking a patient's vitals when the charge nurse told me I had a visitor in the consultation room. My heart sank when I saw her sitting there, her face pale and drawn. I'm pregnant, she said without preamble. It's James's. And Josh thinks it's his. The room spun. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Why are you telling me this? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I need your help. Josh wants to get married, wants to raise this baby together. James says he can't let another man raise his child. He wants to tell Josh everything and... She swallowed hard. He wants us to raise it. You, me, and him. Actually laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from me. You have lost your mind if you think I'm going to play happy family with my cheating husband and his mistress. Please, Clara. You don't understand. James says you've always wanted children. That this could be. Get out. She left, but her words haunted me. How dare he? How dare James think he could betray me, destroy our marriage, and then ask me to mother his illegitimate child like some kind of consolation prize? I went home that night ready for war. But James was already waiting with his own weapons. He sat me down, took my hands in his, hands I used to love, hands that now made my skin crawl, and delivered his carefully rehearsed speech. He was sorry. He'd made a terrible mistake. But the baby was innocent. And didn't I believe every child deserved a loving home? Sienna didn't want to be a mother. Josh would be devastated if he learned the truth. The most compassionate thing, the most logical solution, was for us to take the baby. Think of it as the answer to our prayers, he said, his blue eyes pleading. We wanted a child. Now we can have one. Not like this, I whispered. Never like this. But James didn't give up easily. Over the next few weeks, he launched a full campaign to convince me. He bought baby books. He started clearing out the spare bedroom. He even had his mother call me to talk about forgiveness and what's best for the innocent child. His manipulation was so calculated it took my breath away. The breaking point came when I found out he'd already told Josh the truth, but with a twisted version of events. According to James's story, Sienna had gotten drunk one night and came on to him. It was a one-time mistake. Josh, devastated and furious, had broken up with Sienna immediately. And somehow, James had convinced him that we were the best option to raise the child. Everyone in our circle now expected me to be the bigger person. To forgive. To embrace this situation for the sake of an innocent baby. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of everyone's expectations. But then something happened that changed everything. Sienna called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She was 6 months pregnant and had gone for a routine ultrasound. The baby had a rare genetic marker that the doctors wanted to investigate further. They'd asked her detailed questions about her family medical history and James's. That's when the geneticist mentioned something that made her blood run cold. The father you listed. His family has no history of this particular marker. But it's very common in individuals with Eastern European Jewish ancestry. I'm seeing here that the mother has Russian heritage. Is there any chance the father does as well? James's family was Irish and German. Sienna's mother was from Russia. Josh's parents were both from Ukraine. Sienna had done the math immediately. The timing of her pregnancy, which she'd assumed aligned with her affair with James, actually lined up better with her relationship with Josh. She'd been sleeping with both of them around the same time and had just assumed James was the father because the affair felt more dangerous, more significant. But now, with genetic markers suggesting Josh's ancestry, I need a paternity test, she told me, her voice hollow. Clara, what if I've been wrong this whole time? What if James's been wrong? My hands went numb. Does James know about this? Not yet. The test results won't be back for another week. But Clara, what if the baby isn't his? What if I destroyed Josh for nothing? After she hung up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 2 hours, unable to move. James had blown up his entire life, our entire life, for a baby that might not even be his. He'd manipulated me, gaslit me, convinced our friends and family that I was being selfish, all for a child that could very well belong to the friend he'd betrayed. The irony was almost poetic. But I knew I couldn't tell him. Not yet. 'Cause I needed to know something first. Over the next week, I did my own investigation. I went through James's laptop, his banking statements, his emails. And what I discovered made the infidelity look like child's play. James had been embezzling money from his consulting firm for over a year. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. He'd hidden it in offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and cash deposits to safety deposit boxes I knew nothing about. By my count, he'd stolen close to $400,000. The affair with Sienna hadn't been some midlife crisis or moment of weakness. James had been planning to leave me all along. The money he'd been stealing was his escape fund. Sienna was supposed to be his fresh start. But then she got pregnant, and his perfect plan imploded. The baby, if it was his, would tie him to a scandal he couldn't escape. Josh would find out about the affair. The firm would eventually catch on to the missing money. His entire carefully constructed exit strategy had crumbled. So he'd pivoted. He'd reframed the narrative to make himself the responsible one, the man stepping up to raise his child. He'd manipulated me into considering taking the baby so he could maintain his reputation as a devoted family man while still having access to his stolen money. It was brilliant in a sociopathic kind of way. But what James didn't know was that I'd already contacted his firm's CFO. Anonymously, of course. I'd sent every piece of evidence I'd found, along with a detailed timeline of his theft. The day the paternity results came back, James's entire world fell apart in slow motion. First, Sienna called him with the news. Josh was the father. The baby James had been claiming as his own, the child he'd destroyed our marriage over, wasn't his at all. I watched his face drain of color as he took the call on speaker. His hands shaking. "That's impossible," he kept saying. "The timing, we were together." "So were Josh and I," Sienna said quietly. "More often than I was with you. I'm so sorry, James. I was so sure." He hung up and looked at me with wild eyes. "This doesn't change anything between us. We can still." "Still what?" I interrupted. "Still work this out. James, there's no baby. There's no reason for me to forgive you anymore. Clara, please. I made mistakes, but I love you. We can start over, try for our own child, forget any of this ever happened." That's when my phone buzzed. A text from a former colleague who still worked at James's firm. "Did you hear? They arrested someone in James's department for embezzlement. Everyone's talking about it." I showed James the text and watched the last bit of color drain from his face. "How long have you known?" he whispered. "Long enough," I said. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" Here's what James didn't expect. I'm a nurse, which means I'm a mandatory reporter. And financial crimes that fund drug habits or dangerous behavior fall into my purview when they involve people in my life. But more than that, I'd spent 6 years married to this man. I knew how he thought, how he operated. I knew he'd run. That night, James packed a bag and disappeared. He emptied what was left in our joint account, about $12,000 I'd deliberately left there as bait, and drove to the Canadian border. He almost made it too. But the firm had already contacted the authorities, and there was a warrant out for his arrest. They caught him at a border checkpoint in Vermont, $200,000 in cryptocurrency on a hardware wallet in his backpack and a fake passport with a different name. The trial was brutal. James's lawyers tried to paint him as a man who'd had a mental breakdown, whose affair and subsequent stress had driven him to make irrational decisions. But the prosecutors had evidence of planning that went back 2 years. Character witnesses talked about his manipulation, his lies. Sienna testified about the affair and his attempts to convince her to claim Josh wasn't the father even after the paternity test. Josh testified about the betrayal, his voice breaking as he described losing his best friend and nearly losing his child. I testified about the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the way James had tried to manipulate me into raising another woman's baby to maintain his cover. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. James was sentenced to 8 years for embezzlement, fraud, and wire fraud. He's currently serving time in a federal prison, and I've filed for divorce. Our house sold last month, and I used my half to put a down payment on a small cottage upstate, near a lake where I used to go with my grandmother as a child. Josh and Sienna are trying to work things out for the baby's sake. He named her Aurora. She has Josh's eyes and Sienna's dark hair, and from what I hear, she's healthy and loved. Sometimes people ask me how I'm doing, if I'm angry, if I'm bitter. The truth is, I'm relieved. The marriage I thought I had was a lie, but discovering that before James's plans fully unfolded probably saved me from something even worse. If he'd successfully stolen all that money and convinced me to take in Sienna's baby, I would have been complicit without even knowing it. When everything came crashing down, I would have lost everything, my savings, my reputation, my freedom. Instead, I lost a marriage to a man who never truly existed except in my imagination. What I've learned is this: trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. Those glances I noticed, those whispered conversations, the feeling in my gut that something was off. I should have listened sooner. But I wanted so badly to believe in the life we'd built that I ignored every red flag waving frantically in front of my face. I've also learned that compassion and forgiveness don't mean accepting abuse or manipulation. James wanted me to forgive him, to embrace his betrayal as some kind of blessing in disguise. But real forgiveness comes after accountability, not as a substitute for it. 6 months after James's sentencing, I met someone. His name is Thomas, and he's a teacher at the elementary school near my new cottage. We met at a coffee shop when he accidentally grabbed my order, a ridiculously complicated oat milk latte with vanilla and cinnamon. He was so genuinely apologetic that I couldn't help but laugh. We've been taking things slowly. He knows my story, knows I'm still healing. But there's something refreshingly honest about him. He doesn't play games, doesn't have a secret agenda. When he says he'll call, he calls. When he's upset, he tells me why instead of expecting me to read his mind. I'm not sure where it's going, and for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that uncertainty. Last week, I ran into Sienna at the grocery store. Aurora was in her cart, chewing on a teething ring. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two women whose lives had been turned inside out by the same man's selfishness. "She's beautiful," I said finally. Sienna's eyes filled with tears. "Clara, I'm so sorry. For everything." "I know," I said. And I meant it. We talked for a few minutes, awkward but genuine. She told me Josh had proposed, that they were going to family therapy, that she was trying every day to be better than the person she'd been during the affair. I told her about my cottage, about starting over, about learning to trust again. Before we parted ways, she squeezed my hand. "Thank you for not telling James about the genetic test before the results came in. If you had, I don't know what he would have done. What he might have convinced me to do." Thought about that too. James had been so desperate to control the narrative, to make the baby his salvation. If he'd known there was doubt about paternity, he might have pressured Sienna to not take the test, or worse. By staying quiet, by holding my cards close, I'd protected not just myself but possibly Sienna and Aurora too. Sometimes strength isn't about confrontation. Sometimes it's about knowing when to wait, when to gather your evidence, when to let someone dig their own grave while you build an escape route they don't even see. If you're watching this because something in your own life feels wrong, because someone you love is asking you to ignore your instincts or compromise your values, please listen to that voice inside you. It's not paranoia. It's not selfishness. It's your subconscious trying to protect you from harm you can't yet see clearly. Document everything. Trust yourself. And never, ever let someone convince you that their betrayal is your problem to solve. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. Share your own experiences in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the thing that gives us courage to take that first step toward freedom. My name is Clara, and I survived my husband's betrayal. But more than that, I rediscovered myself on the other side of it. And that's worth more than any marriage built on lies.